Welcome to session number 2 of the orientation pack. In the previous session, we told you a little bit more about the University of Pretoria, and you should have a better idea about the type of support that the Department of Research and Innovation Support offers. In this session, I'm going to share with you more about the division where you will be working, the Research Grants Management Division. So I'm going to share with you a little overview of what the division does, and then I'm going to share with you our processes, and I'm going to link it up the different type of support services that we offer to these processes. So the Research Grants Management Division is responsible for 3 things. We help researchers to identify and apply for research funding, external research funding. We help to facilitate institutional applications, and we nominate researchers for prizes and awards. So I'm going to discuss each one of these in a little bit more detail. So identifying and applying for external funding. So I'm sure you're wondering, what do I mean by external funding? So external funding is anything that is not funded by the University of Pretoria. So you're going to learn a lot that the university provides a lot of its own funding towards research. And it also doesn't include the NRF individual researchers' applications. Okay. There are some exceptions though. We help out with the NRF sabbatical program. This is a program that helps academics to fund academics so that they can finish up their PhDs. And so we help the NRF DA team with that. And we predominantly do that just because we like the early career researchers a lot. Okay, the second one, facilitate institutional applications. Now there are times that a funder requires that an institution applies instead of an individual researcher. These are known as institutional applications. Examples of those are the SARCHIs and the Centers of Excellence. By now you should be familiar about those, or with those. Now these applications often require some internal negotiation. For example, who will be applying on behalf of the institution? Or what is the budget amount that the university will contribute towards these applications? Okay, finally, we nominate researchers for prizes and awards. So I'm sure you've read or just at least scanned through the university strategic plan. You will know that it's very important for the university to be recognized internationally, to improve our international profile. We play a small part in this, and we do that by nominating researchers for prizes and awards. We work very closely with the library to identify good researchers for these prizes and awards. And the library often uses the researchers' publications to identify. And they look at things like the impact factors of the publications. So what's the impact factor? It means how many times other researchers have cited or used those particular articles in their own writing. It's a good indication whether it's a good researcher, if other researchers cite their work. So, I'm sure you get a sense of who our clients are. We work with researchers from all of the faculties. We do not work with postgraduate students. We do not work with postdoctoral fellows, although we do assist research fellows. Now, I hope by now you know the difference of between these. We also work very closely with other researchers from the other universities, especially in cases where other researchers are collaborating with those researchers. And of course, we work very closely with the external funders. So you might be wondering, how is this different from the NRF DA team? Well, first of all, you must remember that we work with different funders, and each one of these funders have a different process. So there's no standard process. Applications forms can be hard copies, they can be electronic online copies or emailed copies. There's no standard process. We're also not just working with individual researchers, but we're working with the institutional applications. So in the next section, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the work process. So, I'm actually a professional fundraiser, so I know what you're thinking. Who on earth wants to be a fundraiser? And in my own defense, I really didn't start out my career wanting to be a fundraiser. It just kind of happened. But I would not change a thing. It's a really enjoyable profession. So although I'm a fundraiser, I specialize in raising funds for research. This is quite a niche. There's not a lot of people that actively raise funds for research projects. But in this environment where we're working, they predominantly describe me as a research administrator. So, like most professions, fundraising has a process. And this is very good. If you understand the process, it means that we can compete with other universities and institutions. It kind of levels the playing field, if you know what I mean. Think about it this way. We're competing for funding with other universities like Harvard and MIT. Okay? That's quite big names. And funding has become very, very competitive. You're going to realize that while you're working here this year. So I want to share with you the ideal fundraising process so that you can get an idea about how it works within this division. Now I say it's ideal because you're going to realize that everything does not always follow the same steps, and sometimes we only come into the process a little bit later on, but it should give you a good overview of what fundraising looks like. So the first step in fundraising is funder identification. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. It means finding sources or organizations that support research so that we know where to apply. The next step is cultivation. So cultivation is building a relationship with representatives at that funding agency, okay? Getting to know funders. The third step is called solicitation. And solicitation is just really a fancy word for asking. And there are various means that we ask for funding, but in our environment it's predominantly through grant writing. Okay? And step number 4 is stewardship. It's such a biblical term, it's such a beautiful word actually. And it means the process of thanking funders and making sure that the reports are done on time. So in research administration though, funder identification, cultivation and solicitation is referred to as pre-award services. So it's services offered before an award is awarded, I suppose. And stewardship is post-award services. So what we're going to do now is we're going to discuss each one of these steps, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more in detail, and I'm going to tell you exactly what type of services we offer under each one of these. Okay, so step number 2 is cultivation. So cultivation is the process where we're building relationships with funding agencies or representatives from these funding agencies. So I'm sure you're wondering, why is this important? Well, funding organizations are just like people. They tend to give funding and support to organizations and researchers that they are familiar with and that they trust. So that's only possible when we know these organizations. So it's an important role that we play to build these relationships. And there are a couple of things that we do. So first of all, we invite them to campus. We invite funding agencies, representatives from the funding agencies to come and visit us on campus. Oftentimes we will introduce them to researchers that are on the same research focus that they have, or we just network with them ourselves also. An important role that we play here is to facilitate meetings between researchers. Now imagine this. Big funding agencies like TIA, for example, are funding different researchers across the university. But they need to meet with these researchers for reporting and things like that. So we arrange the venue and we make sure that all these researchers can be there at the same time. Just kind of facilitate that process. The next thing that we do is we host briefing sessions. So before a funder, this is usually done before a call for proposals or call for funding is released or published. Then we will invite the funding agency to come to campus and to speak to the researchers about what exactly is it that they're looking for. What type of research initiative or project is it that they want to fund with this specific call? It's very important because it allows the research agent, the researcher also to pose questions and make sure that that proposal, their grant application, aligns very nicely with what the funding agency requires. The third thing that we do are podcasts. Now, there are cases that funding agencies can't visit us on campus, or that researchers are not available for a specific, at a specific time slot when the funding agency can be there. In those cases, we often visit the funding agency at their offices, and we will ask the questions that the researchers will probably ask. Then we record these sessions and we put the podcast up on our website, and the researchers can go and listen to it at any time when it's convenient for them. Okay, and then the last one is we also attend events hosted by the funding agencies. Sometimes these are social events, sometimes it's a lot more like briefing sessions that they host at their offices. Sometimes we invite researchers to come with us, and sometimes we attend these by ourselves. But so the primary purpose really is to network with the representatives at these funding agencies. So solicitation is step number 3 in the fundraising process. And it's really just a fancy word for meaning ask. So it's how do we ask for research funding? Now, there are a couple of ways that we can do this, but in our environment, it's predominantly through grant applications. Okay, grant applications. Okay, so I've already explained to you that with external funders, the process is different for each funder. So these grant applications can be an online system, it can be hard copies that we have to mail off, or in some cases it can be even emailing an application. So unlike the NRF team that we spoke about in session number 1, our aim is not really to approve every application that goes out. We are a very small little division, and to give you an idea, we almost submitted over 500 applications last year. So it's impossible for us to kind of police every application that goes out. Our aim is to provide researchers with all the information that they need up front, so that when they come to the application process, that is as easy as possible. They can apply very, very quickly. So some of the things that we do here. One thing is we complete institutional information. So some of the application forms require certain institutional information. This could be things like who's on the university's management committee, or what is certain institutional numbers, and we can complete those. Some of the funders also have what they call compliance documents. So these are predominantly really to determine whether the University of Pretoria is a legitimate institution and not a terrorist organization. But these application packs can be quite tedious, so we do the compliance documents as well. The other thing that we do here is we collect appendices. So some applications require certain attachments, appendices for the grant application, relating to the institution. These could be things like, for example, the financial statements of the university, the confirmation of the university's legal status, things like that. And we collect all that information almost annually, update it, and provide that information to the researchers. A big part of our job with the grant applications are the budgets. Now you will be surprised that a lot of academics actually struggle to compile a budget that accompanies their grant applications, and we help with that. Then what we also do is we arrange institutional approval. Okay, so what are the institutional approval? Some of the grants, the funders require that a representative from the funding agency should sign off on the application, or in some cases they require a letter of support from the institution. And depending on the budget, if it's a big budget, it might be the vice principal of research that has to sign, or if it's a littler budget, the dean that has to write a letter. But we usually draft those letters and arrange that approval for the researchers. Another thing that we do is we facilitate collaborations. Now, in our previous audio, I explained to you what is transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. I explained to you the importance, and I explained to you why it's so challenging to have that type of research. So if you can't recall, I want you to go and listen to that audio session again. So a big part of what we're doing is when the researchers from different faculties apply for one grant as a team, we facilitate and coordinate the inputs of the different researchers so that the different researchers provide their text on the applications, on the application form. We also help negotiate with the budget. You can imagine there's one slice of that, a pie on the budget, and who gets what slice of the budget can be sometimes a little bit sensitive, and we help with that. And finally, we collect all those the appendices for those applications. Things like, imagine 5 or 10 researchers submitting one application, and you need all their CVs, making sure that the CVs are in the right format, etc. Okay, so that is the biggest thing that we do really for grant applications. The other thing that we assist with is online funder applications. Okay, so there are external funders who also have an online application system, much like the NRF, where the researcher has to complete an application online. Examples of this is all US federal funding, okay, and that goes through the grants.gov system. The NIH is another example, Wellcome Trust is another example, the Newton Fund has a system. Okay. These are very important because first of all the institution has to be registered. We maintain that registration. It means that passwords need to be regularly updated. The designated authorities need to be updated on these databases. And we all on these funding application systems. We also help researchers to register themselves. So they often have to register and be linked to the institution. Some of these systems require that the designated authority signs off on the application, much like the NRF, before it's officially submitted to the funding agency. And that is our job also, to make sure that those applications are complete, it's a quality application, and that it's complete before it's submitted. Now, the other thing that we do, way that we ask for funding, is through crowdfunding. Okay, crowdfunding. So we're really just starting out in this, but crowdfunding is where a number of individuals, predominantly individuals, support a research initiative instead of one funding agency. This is usually smaller projects. It's not a project that's continuing. Okay? Okay? So it's usually when a researcher wants to buy a piece of equipment, they just want to raise money for that piece of equipment. So we're playing around with a couple of projects that we have registered for on crowdfunding crowdfunding sites, and I think in the near future this is probably going to become much bigger. But for now, it's early days. We help our researchers to register on these sites, and to get an idea of these, you can go and check out Kickstarter or some of our projects on Give and Gain. And then finally what we do is we offer training. Okay, now you can imagine all these systems are different, and we help researchers to understand it and to apply online on these systems. So one thing that we do for training, for example, is we have the NRF sabbatical program that I spoke to you about earlier. You must remember that for most of these researchers on the sabbatical program, it's the first time that they're applying for funding on the NRF system. So we have training sessions where we register them. We have training sessions where we explain to them exactly how do you create your online form, and we give them some pointers of what type of information they should include under which sections of the online form. Okay, so the final step number 4 is stewardship. So stewardship is the process where we're submitting reports, because we always have to report to the funders how we've spent their money. This is after the project is done often, and but we also thank our funders. I think you're going to be surprised during your year that how few researchers actually thank funders for the funding that they receive. Some ways that they do thank the funders is acknowledging the funders in their research articles, so saying in the front, thank you very much, or mentioning the funders whenever they do a presentation at a conference. Those are some of the ways that they thank them. So what do we do here? First of all, we follow up. My handwriting is bad. Follow up. So you can imagine, after the researcher has submitted that application, whether it's an online, an email, or hard copy, or whatever, there's usually some time that goes up by before we know whether the application was successful or not. And to be honest with you, in some cases, if an application is declined, the funding agency won't even let the researcher know. So we do a lot of follow-up to find out whether the applications were successful, whether they were declined. The second thing that we do is we work closely with the research contract and IP division. So by now you know what they do. Okay? The research contract and IP division, which is a subdivision within the Department of Research and Innovation Support. So as soon as an application was successful, there's always a contract that stipulates how much funding the funding agency is giving, what that funding can be used for, when the researcher must be finished with the research, when reports are due, etc., etc. And here at UP, the researcher can't just sign the contract. Okay? The Research Contracts and IP Division checks the contract for all legal requirements, copyright issues, IP things like that. They have a checklist that goes with that contract, and depending on the budget, it's sent to the correct institutional representative to sign the contract before the contract is sent to the funding agency, who also signs. Okay. The next thing that we assist with is creating cost center numbers. Now, we don't actually do that, but we work very closely with the faculty accountants. Just like we don't do the contracts, it's this division that does it, but we coordinate the process to make sure that it's done swiftly. We work with the faculty accountants to create a cost center number. Now, what is a cost center number? You can imagine the university has one bank account, and all these funders are paying the money into this one bank account, and all your student fees are going into this bank account, and government subsidy is going into this bank account. So after a while, it becomes really difficult distinguishing whose money is whose money. So the faculty accountants creates cost centers, which is almost like a sub-bank account for all the different funding projects, for the funders and projects. This is great because when the researcher has to submit the reports, they often have to submit financial reports as well. So they can just do a printout of that cost center number, and it will stipulate exactly how the researcher spent that money. The other thing that we do here is we send reminders. Okay. So we send reminders to researchers when reports are due, when invoices are due. Now you can imagine some of these research projects are multiple year projects. And for some of these projects there will be multiple reports which will be set out in the contracts. Okay? And in some cases all of the money on it is not paid over at once, but in different payment tranches, depending on how the researcher is delivering on this project. So we help researchers remind them on when the reports and when the invoicing are due. Okay, the next thing that we do is we help with the crowdfunding. Now, I've already explained to you the crowdfunding here under solicitation. So what is the problem with the crowdfunding when it comes to stewardship? Now, our normal processes within the university means that for every grant, for every funding that we receive, there must be a contract and there must be a cost center number. Okay? Now with crowdfunding, this becomes really ridiculous because crowdfunding is a little bit of money. It can be like 100 Rand. Somebody's sitting in Cape Town somewhere that gives 100 Rand towards a research project. And there's no way we're going to go through this whole process of getting a grant agreement and creating a cost center. But because it doesn't fit into the normal processes of the university, we often have to negotiate beforehand with finance so that when the funding comes in, that they know where to channel the funding to and to create one cost center for one crowdfunding project. Okay. So it's more a procedural thing. And then finally, the online payment systems. So gone are the days, or very soon gone will be the days where we send an invoice to a funder and the funder makes a payment based on the invoice. A lot of the federal funding, US funding agencies, and in some cases where we are sub-awardees on a grant, for example, we're partnering with a US university, but we're only doing a small component of that project. For those cases, we often have to register the university on those organizations' procurement systems. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the procurement system. The problem is that it's also, again, outside the normal procedure of the university, of the university's finance processes. So we have to register the university, we have to register the individual researcher. We, in many cases, have to help the researcher claim that money. So often what will happen is the researcher has to spend the money and then claim the money back, right? And we help with the reporting, the financial reporting. Okay, so we've reached the end of session number 2, so you should have a fairly good idea about what the Research Grants Management Division is responsible for. So I gave you an overview of the 3 primary things that we do. If you recall, we help our researchers identify and apply for external research funding. The second thing is we facilitate institutional applications, so the same process for institutional applications. And we nominate researchers for prizes and awards. So I explained to you the fundraising process, right? Funder identification, step number 1. Cultivation, step number 2. Solicitation, step number 3. And stewardship, step number 4. And I've explained to you in detail the type of services that we offer under each step. So before I explain to you how you fit into this division and into this process, we're going to discuss in our next session, session, some more practical issues. Things like, for example, how do you get your personnel card, where do you sign up for a group-wise email address, some training that I want you to go to, things like that. But that's for our next session. So now, underneath this video, there are links to various resources. I want you to go and check it out. The first one is the UP Research website. I want you to go and have a look around, play around on the website and see what are the type of information that we put on there. Particularly look at the call schedules and check out the podcasts that we have on the website. The next thing that I want you to do, also remember that you have to register on the website for the various funding databases as well as the research funding bulletin. So I want you to receive those things. So make sure that you register for those. The next thing that I want you to do is to go and check out the funding databases. Go and register. You will receive your login details. Go check out Research Africa and Pivot. Play around. Maybe look for some funding for your own research or for scholarships if you're interested in that type of thing. And then finally, I want you to go and have a look at websites like Give and Gain and Kickstarter. I want you to have a clear idea what is the distinction between crowdfunding and the grant applications.